So the prompt for this discussion, I'm ignoring the first paragraph. We would like you to share your perspective on what might be called validity or trustworthiness in qualitative research. And you may choose to adopt the perspective of a single source, meld multiple sources, or create your own explanation, which to me seems like, how do you interpret what trustworthiness is and validity, which I didn't realize you could get into and dissect and create multiple definitions, interpretations for, but the book certainly does. Um, so I'm going to preface my little response to this because I keep doing this and I hate that I keep doing it, but I always go back to um, like my the graduate school art making when we make art, like part of, like, it's the craft is not really what I'm talking about, it's the conceptualizing of it. And it's very it's mind-blowing how similar the process is for making a project or making artwork or your statement, whatever it is. And this research, and I think it would have been really helpful to have these definitions because we were just kind of like, I don't know, I like this and this, but triangulation was a huge thing when it came to uh, just kind of some checks and balances, right? In terms of if you're making a statement as an artist, like why, how, what's your reference, what are you talking about, like how do you share that? And so as far as validity, I think that it's, for me, it's something that is uh that I would definitely look out to the other resources, but also if it's a study, the participants, keeping me in check, what they've talked about. Uh but yeah, what do you guys think?
I think me and you have a similar thought. So I was reading the chapter. So I don't know if our books are a little bit different because I do have the third edition. But so the one perspective that I found maybe kind of relates to what you're talking about, Juan, is the perspective from Lincoln, and Guba from 2011, where they're saying that your validity can change based like your research you're doing, the participants that are participating in your research. So making sure it works with what you're doing. So I kind of feel like what you're describing kind of sounds like that, how you're saying like look who your participants are, your research is. So that to me, I think most aligned what I was thinking, how you would look at validity too.
I completely agree. And like I thought I was going to be like so clever with my little what I was going to talk about. But I think ultimately what you think of as validity for any given study depends on what question is being asked. And I think when you ask the question, the two-headed side to that coin is if this is what I seek, how do I make sure that what I'm getting what I'm seeking? And so I just thought that was such an interesting relationship that I hadn't thought of before. That being said, because you guys have done a great job of kind of talking about that, I'll go to the other quote I found from the book that I think a lot of qualitative research, certainly study, the type of study of the five that we've learned might influence this. But I really feel that this was such a good quote from Creswell's findings. Are the findings transferable between the researcher and those being studied? Thick description is necessary. And so I love the idea that the researcher is studying the subject, but ultimately it is the researcher's responsibility um, that that they can transfer what they've learned back to the subject, and the subject can sit there and nod or correct or get some insight from what the researcher has gleaned from them. I thought that that was such an interesting and important, like, never with quantitative could you even, like, an ANOVA just isn't going to have an opinion, are you going to, this kind of idea that knowledge is what we construct is ultimately what makes qualitative data answer the why in such a interesting and important way. So I just thought that that was a good, for me, that can be translated in a lot of different ways, and I have some more on like how you actualize that. But I think that just concept that the researcher studies, and then they have to transfer that information back to the subject. And it has to be thick and rich and descriptive. And the subject themselves may learn something from what the research gleaned. Like that's ultimately, probably the best validity you're going to get in a study.
So many thoughts banging around in my head, thinking about. So I looked at one of the articles, The Quality of Qualitative Research by Colin Ridge and Gant, 2008. And one of the quotes there started off kind of my thought process. It is difficult to evaluate the merits of one research paradigm from the perspective of a different paradigm because of different standards of research. Right. And so that really just took me to say, yeah, it really does. It depends on what format you're using or what your framework is, first and foremost, right? As we try to understand how you validate this or what's quality and what's trustworthy. And so Crosswell and Poth did, they gave us all these different types of this criteria. And so it brought me all the way back, because in other words, I'll be talking for the next 20 minutes to really say that triangulation piece that Juan brought up earlier is, to me, again, kind of the whole umbrella for my perspective. I think to validate and for it to have some type of trustworthiness, you got to have these various aspects of data points where you're pulling from various things. I can only remember when I first got into higher education, and coming from the corporate side of things, everything had to be validated, or you had to cite everything. Where was the rigor, right? And so, what I just remember thinking like what rigor? What does that mean? And so, I'm just going to stop there because, like I said, my brain is all over the place. But that's where I come, is that triangulation of making sure your research has these multiple sources of data from that perspective.
So you mentioned trustworthiness and like how do you, that's one thing I think that it seems like there's a simple answer for it, but how do you guarantee trustworthiness, right? What do you guys think? I have my opinion, but
I think one of the ways suggested, or one way is, is there comparability? Is this, something, and I think that for certain things that is absolutely appropriate. If you're trying to figure out why people don't use your toothpaste, it's probably really important to compare one group opinion on this to another group's opinion on this. But if you're trying to understand phenomena of this group experiencing it at this time, comparability may not be an appropriate use or appropriate validity there. Something Walcott or Creswell noted Walcott said is, you want to understand rather than convince. And I think that comparability is our kind of positivist, put together an argument, shoot down my hypothesis. And I think sometimes, and like I said, comparing toothpaste and why you don't brush your teeth, sure. But when you're kind of trying to understand just the experience as it is, to understand and not convince. And so I think that's a trap by which what we're raised with the scientific method. We may always kind of go to that's like the gold standard, and it's like, well, it kind of depends on what you're trying to do.
I also think it depends on, noted in the book too, to your point, Alisha, when you think about the lenses or the perspective that
Yeah.
these are looked at, right? Researchers or the participants, whose lens are we looking at this, and the readers or the reviewers? I think we find ourselves in all those positions depending on what we're doing. But at the same time, you can't necessarily, like, the trustworthiness of, you're right, because we bring bias, right? And if I'm looking at I'm just going to just out myself here. If I'm looking at a research paper that's done by a person that I don't necessarily like, they could have all the trustworthiness in the world, but my bias may get it. So, right. So it goes back to that. Yeah. Anyways, that's.
well, I think it's interesting that I think there's still that you're putting bias in there because I think for me the kind of the core of trustworthiness is clarity of process and um uh being as I guess, open to people looking at your study in many different ways, and so just not hiding anything. And I think even if it's someone I disagree with and the bias is already there, if there's already if there is, that kind of ability for me to go and look at the process in which they collected the data and the process in which they, did all of conducted the research, I feel like that, even though I may disagree, I can still trust that the study was done, above, above board, so to speak. And I think about that when just because I really like to make you guys all, I look at the Alicia's house and it's all gray and white, and I'm like, I should talk to these people about art a little bit more. But uh, but the when and this is something as a teacher, it's wonderful, Alicia. It is. There's a plant that's good. So the I talk to students about because if you're putting artwork, if you're making artwork, it's kind of, oh, look at that, that's nice, that's great, Target loves you. So anyway, we're gonna we're when they're making, it's a conversation that they're having, right? So I can see a study operating the same way. It's where you're trying to, produce this information and have this conversation. And there's different ways. If you go back to like, if you guys ever took like speech or communications, Aristotle's methods of persuasion, right? How you get that information across, and how you present it, contributes to that trustworthiness, right? So if we're kind of like, if it feels like we're hiding something, or we're not kind of addressing something because it could counter our opinion or counter our study, then the trustworthiness is out the window, right? So how do you maintain that, with understanding that you want people to get something from it? Like I'm curious, like what would you do if you got to that point with a study from you guys are doing on where it's like all of a sudden, like, ooh, the data's pointing to the other direction now. Like, how do you handle that,
Right. And I agree. Well, something Lisa said I agree with too is that having more than one group people that's part of the study, that they're separately, like how you mentioned, if you got to the end and the data showing one thing, it was like, okay, let me kind of go back to the basics, redo the study again with a different set of people, see if I'm getting the same outcome. Maybe you have to do it more than once to see if, again, if it's going to be trustworthy. So doing that same study again with a different set of people, same rules, just a different set of people though, see if the outcome could change. And another thing too is having a different perspective look at it. So like how you mentioned the biases could come in. Maybe if you have a research partner who you guys work together, they're familiar with the quantitative research. It's still your research, they know it's yours, but having them look at too, see maybe if you missed something that maybe that bias, you mentioned that bias can set in. If that bias setting in, they can catch it, and or you guys can see what's bounce ideas off each other, see what's happening.
So one of the things you kind of touched on is the saturation. So some of the things that we're studying, maybe it's not about comparison, it's just making sure that you've saturated yourself with enough of responses to really have a sense that you, based on these responses, now have enough content to really code and then like move away and develop themes. So part of trustworthiness is, do you have enough saturation of what you're studying to feel comfortable drawing conclusions and opinions on it? I think one thing that maybe we're all a little, and again, I think this is because of, how we were raised on the scientific theory, is the role of the researcher and reflexivity. Like, are we reflecting as we're going, and how important that is? Because it seems kind of like you shouldn't do that. You're supposed to write in the third person. You're supposed to, even if we understand ourselves, this idea of bracketing, to understand that that is part of validity and being comfortable and like talking about it the way we talk about comparability. I think that's where we're kind of seeing, this qualitative journey that we've been on. It has a new set of standards that is we're being introduced to and, slowly but surely getting comfortable with.
No, I think that's a great point. And that was something that was told to me or suggested, recommended, some advice that was given to me at the very beginning of this class. I was kind of fighting with myself. And Dr. B wrote in a comment to say, yo, like you can do it, You just got to make sure you are addressing it and making it known that, you know, you may have these bias and this is your position in it. And what I just heard you folks say, and that's what's come through the book over this last week, is that has to be a continuous thing, that you are positioning yourself in wherever you are. Just like last week, we talked about being able to get the consent, the continuous consent piece. I think this is one of those things too, to have that continuous for the validity of it, right? So yeah. But I think we did a good job. Did we answer everything?
I believe so.
I believe
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
stop the recording.
Yay. Cool.